Well, welcome back to the final session of this forum. My name is Simon Upton, and I'm the director of the environment team here, and I've listened to quite a lot of the proceedings. It's very nice to have a green growth topic being discussed squarely in somebody else's patch, in Andy's patch. So I've learned a great deal, and I haven't had to say anything, and I'm not going to break that rule now. We've got 3 report backs from parallel sessions, and then we're going to have some remarks from Andy Wyckoff, my colleague who runs STI, as we all affectionately know it, and then some closing comments from our Deputy Secretary, Mr. Tamaki. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask Jim Dratois to report back on his breakout group, please.
Splendid. Thanks ever so much, Simon. And indeed, what an exciting conversation we had. It was in this very room. Really good discussion going on. 3 excellent presenters. The first point reporting here, of course, the first point that emerged from this conversation is really a question. And that question is, where are the others? Where are other people that are not with us today? But starting from this realization that this forum has been a great success precisely in terms of answering that question, a great success of bringing together within the OECD people from different directorates, working parties, and committees, and not just within the organization, but further afield as well. And then nonetheless, where are the others? Who could we, if we close our eyes a moment and think, who else should contribute to this reflection? And how can we bring them in? And then really an invitation to reflect on the fact that this has been, in so many ways, a resounding success. The 2 days that we've had a chance to spend together. And still, let's not rest on our laurels. How can we make the next Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum even better? And can that question, where are the others, guide the reflection in that regard? It is, of course, about innovation, systems innovation. And the second dimension was a reflection on what innovation are we talking about? Who are the innovators? What is innovation? Systems innovation, of course, and nonetheless, there was such an emphasis on technology, on, a sort of, it's always difficult to depart from the tech fix trap, as it were, and in a sort of exhilarating post-COP21 context, it's proved also somewhat difficult to depart from the carbon fix trap. Leading to the question about what is green? What is green and green growth? Is mitigating carbon the answer to that question? Can we really say, we talked about the what, we talked about the why, now let's just focus on the how? Or should we perhaps continue to reopen or maintain open the question of what it is to be green? Why are we doing this? What is the purpose of this endeavor? We had gathered with us provocative speakers and a very thought-provoking, provocative audience as well. So the disruption potential was realized to a large extent. In terms of next steps and very clear orientations for action, we had a set of suggestions requesting us to take innovation away from classical notions of innovation as technological innovation and technological innovation as steer less, as inherently good, towards innovation that would tackle grand societal challenges. And that was an interesting first move. And then a second move requiring us to reflect on what are those grand societal challenges, how they should be tackled, by whom, and really to maintain open spaces for simultaneously social and technological innovation. And even this partition between social and innovation is not really what we want, but really to enrich our notion of what innovation is. And henceforth, our notion of who the innovators are, not just folks in suit in high-tech companies, but people in very different contexts. And there too, in terms of next steps or directions for action, a reflection on the very notion of best practice. We have this understanding of best practice as something very tightly framed. But what if we embarked on a search for stories in very different contexts, in Asia, Africa, closer to here as well, of things that have worked well, transformations that have been enabled, and who's been involved in them? What has made those transformations possible? And how can perhaps this transformational potential, these innovations, be cross-fertilized, be drawn from in other contexts as well? Really a reflection on public engagement, as well as on risk and trust, the three guiding lights of the session. And an invitation to see trust not as a synonym for social acceptance. How can we sedate publics? How can we placate publics? But rather a reflection on the relation of trust and the power relation inside the relation of trust. So often, trust is asked by the more powerful from the least powerful. Can we rightfully deserve that trust? And also, can we reverse this relationship? And can we ourselves, what would it take it for us? What would it take for us to be more trusting? Finally, in this session on participation, a call upon all of us to make space for contestation. How can we not succumb to the temptation to reduce spaces of contestation, spaces of possibility, but to open those spaces also of diversity. Not hold on to our predefined notions of what is right and how can we roll out those predefined notions, but to maintain the openness as to what the goals may be and the best ways to achieve them as well. In the spirit of public engagement, I turn to the many people who were at our breakout session. If there is something that I desperately need to report on, you can... Okay, I seem to have done a pretty good job. Very well. So this is it for us.
Okay, just I'm not going to let you lead because
Certainly wouldn't want to.
this is a very important session for those of us who work here, because we really are looking for some clarity around where we should be moving. And you raised a lot of questions, but I'm looking for some reasonably concrete answers to some of them. When you say, where are the others? Okay, look, who are the others that weren't here who should have been in your view? Could you nominate?
As someone who's been tasked to report, I would certainly not want to betray the spirit of that
No,
guiding
but
question.
just take a stab. I mean,
yeah, sure. So whatever answer I'm going to give, the idea is that this question needs to be upheld, not answered, not quenched, but really upheld. The others are the farmers in the story of Jeremy, one of our speakers, who told us about the development of GM crops in Africa. There was a very clear view from the scientists, public authorities, Monsanto. And then when the farmers were allowed to join the table, suddenly things changed completely. And there was a realization that, no, the crops that we thought on paper were exactly what were needed, or in fact the crops that were successful in field trials in other countries nearby were not at all what was required in that context. And it's a great story because the farmers isn't the answer to the question, where are the others? It's just the beginning of the answer. There were people who were not invited and who were still knocking at the door.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just this shop deals in policy communities, and you've got science, innovation, industry, policy community here. You've got some people probably from the environment policy community. Are there any policy community? I mean, your answer, I take it there, is, look, these are technology users, or the people who... for whom solutions come out of the sky and they're expected to use them. But I mean, are there some policy communities your group identified that we need to be engaging with? Because we can engage with everybody here at the OECD. It's a question of putting together the policy communities.
Great. So first of all, we're starting from the realization that this Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum has been a success story in terms of engaging different community policies. I mean, the fact that Andy and yourself are sitting here is just one example of this. And so, that's the first important point to make. But after having been said, the very notion that there are the technology pushers and the technology users or receivers, and that there are certain policy communities that can be engaged, but people who would not belong to those communities, well, of course, we can't engage with them, is, I believe, reporting from that session, what precisely was being challenged in that context.
Okay, all right. Well, we better move on because we've got two other groups. Thank you very much, Jim. It's much appreciated. Now I'm going to come to Roland Summer.
Thank you. I should have a presentation which supports my reporting back. Okay, great. First of all, I would just briefly mention the speakers. One from the Global Green Growth Institute in India, Pranab Barua, Marcos Alegre from Peru, and Asaf Zahor from Israel. And I will just very briefly explain what they presented, and then also report back the discussions we had. On the first one, it was about the necessity of the green economy transition, and particularly two very concrete examples were presented, and that was the Green Growth Knowledge Platform and the Green Growth Best Practice Initiative. And this is a repository of a lot of data and a lot of from various countries, etc. Lessons learned is that if you try to deal with that, and we will come on, I will focus on that also in the discussions, there's often a lack of strategy in introducing that. Facilitators are key to do that. And future work is to work out together the private sector and the public sector to have some win-win avenues and real-time communication on the ground, to mention a few of these. The second one was cases and lessons learned from Peru, about the National Cleaner Production Center in Peru. And it was presented the Resource Efficient and Cleaner Production Global Net. And that is a very interesting network. But the use of the platform could be higher. That was one of the feedbacks. And these kind of platforms also are in competition with platforms like Google or others. And we have to find solutions to use these more. Also, there was presented the Green Credit Fund, and what is interesting about the Green Credit Fund is that a cooperation agency, a technical service provider, and banks work together to come up with a new solution. Two practical examples were presented, the first one on zero wastewater and the second one on eco-innovation in Peru. And what I found interesting is that they're both reflecting, when they have cases with SMEs, on the eco-innovation manual by the UNEP, but they have to adapt this manual, so you cannot take it one-to-one for these cases. I blow the microphone. And lessons learned were you have to involve, I mentioned three helix. It's industry, it's research institutions, and it's the public sector. You have to develop local tools. There's a big knowledge gap of SMEs. And you have to find about incentives that are smart enough to change something. The third case was a very interesting case. It's about the transfer, I would say, of the National Innovation System of Israel. They presented evidence, or ASAF presented evidence of that. Some of the policy principles of the National Innovation System of Israel. Also, the problems they have a lack of information. They have sometimes a lack of finance. They have to find private sector partners, and they urgently need something like demonstration sites to show that some technology works. They also showed the mechanisms in place and supporting instruments of basic research, applied research, competitive R&D, but also international cooperation. And there are many international cooperations bilaterally between Israel and many other countries. And they also showed some results on statistics, outcomes of the policy measures, but also there were a couple of startup companies that were financed by venture capital, and they showed also a concrete example of a photovoltaic panel in Rwanda was presented. Now, we had a very intense and I think very fruitful discussion. I tried to write down some of the ideas and the questions that were raised, and these questions are basically also knowledge gaps and something that you, Andrew, have to take up because there's some future works that could be in these discussions. The first question was, there is so much talking about R&D, and yet most of the countries have bilateral agreements. And why is this the case? Well, there were some discussions about answers, but we haven't sort of finally found that out.
As distinct from plurilateral. I mean, is that what you mean?
It's for instance, Israel has a bilateral agreement on R&D with Singapore.
Yeah. But it's always just two.
It's always just two, right. Then you need indicators on the grassroots level, and which indicators, where to start first, and you need social indicators, and it's often very difficult to find these indicators. And then the accessibility and the availability of data is not always given. So sometimes, because of the lack of data, no decision is possible. And from Asaf, from Israel, there were some ideas on what he would suggest, and that is behavioral economics for consumption data. So you could separate between the production side and the consumption side, and particularly with the consumption side, it's very difficult to get data. So behavioral economics could be one way forward. Also, to combine it with an evidence approach. A systems inventive thinking could be, and a design thinking could be also other ways forward. Then in many cases, R&D agreements are often limited to technology. And why is that the case? Because we also have social innovations, we have new business models, etc. And why not include these in R&D agreements? So that would be also one of the future ways to work. Then often it's about changing the mindset. And where is the best level to change the mindset? Should we start with the very young ones, or in school, or in university, or all over the place, and with every age? That was one of the discussions. And the last point of discussion was, and that was a very specific question, there's a lack of cooperation with African countries, for instance, with regard to solar. And there's an abundance of solar energy. Why is not much more going on with that? And my last question is another best practice example of multilateral agreements. It would be the European technology platforms. I don't want to go into detail with that, but just this is an example. That would be my report.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I just do a quick check with the audience here? Is your perception that most of these agreements are bilateral? No? Well, there's multilateral, there's bilateral, but in between, I think you were thinking more of perhaps 2, 3, 4, plurilateral. Right. I mean, it's an interesting point. I'd never thought of it, but can I just make this suggestion that this is something which global environmental problems like climate raise a very interesting basis for cooperation, because things like climate or things like biosecurity risk or whatever, they run across borders. They have actually a physical, a biophysical, often a latitudinal or longitudinal range. And so the need to work outside of purely national borders comes through. I mean, we had hoped to have the people in New Zealand who have been developing this agricultural greenhouse gas alliance. They're working with they've split the world into temperate areas, I think, and tropical areas and so on and so forth. But I think one of the interesting things coming out of this whole green thing is that, needless to say, the planet didn't invent national borders for us. We did, and we need to find a way through that.
I mean, you have this multilateral research corporation like CERN, which is the biggest one around the very big research infrastructure. And one of the questions that was raised is, of course, all these institutions and universities have a certain capacity of interacting with others, and they have to select which is the best partner. Maybe this could be one of the ideas, but this would be something that is particularly interesting because of the technology transfer is then important.
All right. Thank you very much, Roland. That's some good, clear points we can follow up there. And finally, Tamuras Magulia from Georgia, and your group, I think, was working on innovation, measurement, and learning. Absolutely. Please.
So, thank you very much. It was an honor for me to moderate this group. As soon as measurement is key, when you want to change something, when you want to improve something, and I found that it is not only me thinking so, as soon as room was full of interested people. And thus, I think we produced some interesting outcomes. Let me also show on the screen. We tried to stick with expectations of the forum and divided into 3 groups: key knowledge gaps, best practices, and definitely priorities for future work. Regarding to knowledge gaps, obviously, not surprisingly, we identified a challenge of defining what is green innovation. Actually, innovation itself is not easy to define, and green innovation is even more difficult, but I think this is something which should be clarified, and we have it in the priorities. Another challenge is defining measurement of system innovations, because it is quite complicated approach. It needs a lot of indicators. It should be broken down. We consider that it cannot be reflected in 1 or 2 of those. And here comes the biggest challenge, especially for developing countries, lack of data. Actually, not many statistical systems or governmental bodies' internal accounting actually produce necessary relevant data to make possible set up synthesized indicators. And even such an indicators exist, there is a limited use of them. Actually, it was important to mention that unlike GDP, for example, which is clear benchmark among nations and widely used, we do not have such a benchmarking indicators or maybe indicator systems in green growth, in green development. That's why quite few nations actually try to utilize them for benchmarking. OECD is doing great jobs to produce relevant green indicators, but once again, we do not have that much consolidated ones which can be compared like GDP is compared among nations. So, and here we come to best practices. Actually, those best practices are much like democracy. They are not ideal, but that is what we have. So, first of all, our colleague, Antoine Deschelles-Zepetre, I am sure I pronounced it properly, provided his view on possibility to use patent data, R&D spending as a input for understanding more about innovations, evaluate, measure innovations. This approach has some weaknesses too, because these are just inputs, and as any inputs, they are not guaranteeing to have necessary outputs and especially necessary outcomes. Still, these are good starting points to understand at least what we are investing in innovations, how we are producing those innovations. For me personally, idea of Lucas Porsche about impact chain measurement was very important, because as it happens in many other chains, in innovation system, it is not static. It does not happen only once in a time and disappears. Every innovation drives to another innovation, that to other one. Actually, it was mentioned by other speakers too. And this impact chain is really true reflection of how innovation system works. And if we can somehow apply measurement system to this impact chain, this is really true success. Once again, all these are currently in the very early stage of emerging. They are emerging currently, early stage of development, but these are what we have. I already mentioned that we are lacking good common measurement system. And I was happy to find that Mr. José Pineda suggested, based on his work with UNEP, one of the possibilities of having integrated measurement framework, because this kind of framework really matters a lot. And I think if we are able to further develop such kind of measurement the measurement frameworks, it will really drive us to better understanding of innovation measurement. And my personal experience based on what we are doing in Georgia is trying to monetize changes in pressure. It is not easy, but obviously every pressure on nature brings some financial load to government or general public or businesses, and those are measurable. This is still far away from being ideal, but at least you can monetize it, and as soon as you can monetize something, you can then compare, you can assess, and do whatever you like. So this is also currently emerging, but this is what may be a good practice. Once again, whatever we are putting here as best practices, everything is currently emerging to be a good practice, and we expect them to later become a best practice. And of course, the priorities for future work heavily are dependent on what we discussed. And obviously, we have to somehow improve green definitions. And here I think it is really OECD's work to make it, because OECD for me and many like-minded people is a body which spirit is to deliver best standards, best approaches, best solutions to the world. And I think OECD can really make impact here, and it is a true direction to innovate on this. Make usable in decision making means a lot for all of us who were in the room, in the session, because what is the reason of having whatever measurement? It is to allow us in our judgment, allow us in our decision making. After all, what governments or businesses, whoever in decision making need? They need comparability. They need to select among various inputs which option to select, what choice to make. And measurement systems are definitely targeted to allow this selection. And that's why I think it is important to focus, target measurement systems for the decision making. And last, I think it may be formulated a little bit strangely, but to innovate on innovations means that we still need to think a lot on innovation measurement, green innovation measurement, development measurement, and really here is a huge space for new discoveries. Here is a huge space to understand what is the proper system. Once again, it may be new integrated framework or measurement, it may be set of measurement indicators, but whatever it may appear later, it should be clearly, it should deliver possibility to understand where we are heading to, and what's most important, how we are comparing options among each other. So this was the main output of the session. I'm really looking forward, as it was very important, that next time it should be as a main agenda item rather than optional. Mr. Upton.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very concrete and very useful. This debate about what is green, I have to say, I like to think we've left that behind here. We went through a lot of navel-gazing 4 or 5 years ago. The difficulty is this, that the need to green things, and its shorthand, is the need to bring our economic and social footprint within what the planet can sustain. The one thing which is scarce, there's no scarcity of human ingenuity, there's no scarcity of natural resources to be exploited in a realistic sense. The Earth's crust's quite big. There's a lot of it. The real scarcity is the planet's capacity to absorb waste streams. That is what we're short of. And currently we're treating the planet as though it was just unlimited. And it isn't. And it's catching up with us rather spectacularly because we've done so much research on climate. We know so much more about the atmosphere and the atmosphere-ocean interface as a result of 20 years and mind-bogglingly large sums of money. It's been a really incredible ride. We know a fraction in many other environmental areas. But so what's green is really about absorptive capacity of the planet. And so, in a sense, all economic activity has to be greener. There's not two bits. There's not there's sort of an economic bit and then there's a green economic bit. Just like there can't really be a green innovation bit and then another sort of innovation bit. It's all got to be linked up. We've just had this debate on green bonds, by the way, trying to the financial arrangements. What's a green bond? Well, at the end of the day, the 100 trillion, is it 100 trillion, Mr. Tamaki, the global bond market? 90, yeah. These vast sums of money, they've all got to be green, because if they're not, you're still not addressing the problem. But of course, to get there, you have to say that something is green to distinguish it from that which is not. And I think that's really the challenge probably here. Anyhow, I'm pleased Andy's heard this, because we thought we were the only people who had these sort of existential and metaphysical discussions, and it looks like you've got some too. But just on indicators, if I may, we have done a lot here. And I do think that the green growth indicators really do have real... they've got some real bite. The ones that we do on carbon, both on a production and embedded, on a consumption basis, these are real indicators. And the the newfangled environmentally adjusted multi-factor productivity indicator really is a significant step forward methodologically in trying to analyse growth in a way which takes account of these things. But we need the same for innovation. Let me just, before I ask Andy to speak, tell you that when I came here in 2010, which was at the time the Green Growth Strategy was halfway through, there were 4 directorates of the OECD involved. So even from then, it's been a very horizontal affair, and the 4 core directorates were and are still to this day the Economics Department, the Statistics Directorate, the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate, which was then still called the Science, Technology and Industry Directorate, but it's now got innovation in the place of the I, and the Environment Directorate. Now, we're much broader than that. We're much, much more horizontal today, but this really, Andy's area, is the area where I think we all need to do more, and we need to listen to you more, because I'll just make an observation as a former politician. The public really haven't got a clue how this is all going to be solved, except that technology will come along. There is an extraordinary faith from those of you from the STI community that you're going to have some answers sometime. So Andy, look, welcome. It's great to have you here at the end of the forum. Could you give us your view, perhaps on where we need to be pushing our thinking for the future?
Thank you, Simon. I'm used to working with Simon. As he said, we've been working together a long time. And so as we walk in, he says, you know, I looked at your speaking notes. I don't want you to use those. I want you to address the challenges. But what I'm really happiest about is he said we don't need to define green. So think of my jacket this afternoon as just as green as his, okay? This is the mother of all policy problems, I think. It's fascinating if you deal in a policy shop. It is intergenerational. It is the whole planet. It is extraordinarily expensive. You know these things better than I do. Now, this workshop comes at a really good time because we're just now thinking about our future work program for 17-18. And I've been picking up ideas, and I've been lurking in the back in and out of various meetings, which is, I was really taken by one of the presentations that I think appeals to me, that we are at this pivot point. It is time to move, and move dramatically. And that doesn't mean, and as Simon just says, you press on every button you have. Everything is all of a sudden green. And so it means radical innovations, which I guess we're looking for a silver bullet. I wouldn't look too hard, right? Several. But it means trillions and billions of incrementals, too, which I think can get you closer than you might think. And it was said it's more than just technological innovation. There's a lot of non-technological innovation. And that's one of the areas where I think we fall down on in the science, technology, and innovation. And I'll come back to that in a second. I just want to talk a little bit about things we're doing that would relate. In this one project, actually, the only partner we have really on this one project called the Next Production Revolution is the Environment Directorate, which is a little bit surprising. And that's because we're looking at some of these new technologies, 3D printing, the industrial internet, advanced robotics, as a ways to dramatically increase the efficiency of how we make things, and at the same time, maybe decrease the need for transportation. There's a theory out there, you might not need to ship as much stuff around the planet if you can just digitize most of it and produce it on demand where you are. Now, that's the good news. As we get into this, we begin to realize, you know, some of those cartridges you're putting into your 3D printer, this is really nasty, toxic stuff. And so it's not just there's going to be trade-offs all the way along, and we got to be cognizant of this. I guess what I like about the Next Production Revolution work is that now our council and mainstream policymakers are beginning to realize this kind of bottom-up micro economics is important for the macro scene, and they've seized on it as one of the themes for this coming June's ministerial meeting. We're doing a lot of work on the bioeconomy. We always have. As Simon says, it's really about that interface and getting rid of the waste stream. I think there's potential here Again, we create a forum for that, and it's about mainly getting some of the markets working. I think one neglected area of this house, I challenge Simon a little bit, is oceans. We don't really do joined up work in this house on oceans. It's incredibly important. 3 billion people live within 100 miles. It's essential to some of those waste streams he's talking about. The oceans are suffering too. And there's things we can do to look at oceans. I have and now Simon's increasingly a partner here, I run something called the Space Forum, which is a really neat little group. And there's so much we can do with Earth observation to both detect earlier and to help us pinpoint interventions, but also to help us reduce some of the risks out there. This is kind of just a little bit boutique group. Maybe we need to bring it in more mainstream. And actually, I know Simon's group is now beginning to take data from this area, which I think is very, very promising. We need to up our cooperation, as Jim said, in STI cooperation. What does this really look like? We just held a ministerial in third week of October in Daejeon, Korea. I think one of the most important things to come out of this ministerial was this declaration, which we always do at ministerials. But there's a line in this one that's worth pausing on, because it calls on the OECD, I'm going to put it in layman's terms, to do a mapping of basic R&D around the globe. Figure out who is doing what with basic, fundamental, blue sky type research on which topic areas. And this is to, A, identify places where countries could cooperate in a more of a multilateral setting. B, to identify places where maybe there's duplication that money can be saved. And C, there's some dark spots. There's fads in R&D, and not everything goes to the highest social use. And maybe we can identify some of those dark spots and say, listen, can we nudge some R&D in this direction? The last speaker was great on evidence-based policy. It's actually how I originally got to know Simon. He was the only one who would listen to our carbon embodiment work in the whole house. And now it's gone mainstream. And this is interesting work, but you need to look at the data behind that as a platform which you could pivot and use in many different areas. We could look at the embodiment of water and products if we knew water consumption with some detail across industries. And I know silicon chips take a tremendous amount of water to make, just to name one. But he can go back to that. Let me just move to his penultimate question, the elephants in the room. And if I can just list off a few. Okay, I think we need differentiated innovation policies. We're not really good at this. I think so many innovation policies tend to fixate on one thing, R&D and targets. Are we at 3%? Are we at 3.2? Are we 1.7? This drives me mildly crazy. I don't think it's the point. But we can come back to that in Q&A if you want. I think we need to differentiate between startups, many of which are digital these days, versus legacy sectors, which have completely different innovation needs. And tailor things, as I said, you need to differentiate between tech and non-tech innovation. Non-tech innovation can be hugely important. If you can make something popular or fad or a new business model, this can have both negative or positive effects. There's many of you know in the room, folklore about Innocentive. It's this site that puts up bounties that if you solve this R&D problem, we will pay you X, tens of thousands of dollars. It's been incredibly successful. And there's been some very interesting research on who wins these prizes, these bounties. And usually it happens from people outside of the field to which the problem was posed. And this talks about kind of orthogonal thinking. And I have to believe if we're going to find some very neat solutions for green whatever, won't come from the environment and energy fields, which is where we show this figure of their R&D going down. It's going to come from completely different areas and be applied in a much different way than we would have ever guessed. For example, it's not the automobile companies that come up with the driverless car or the automatic car. Two last things, and this goes, maybe it's been discussed here. We see intellectual property rights as a policy area that has mushroomed over the last 10, 15 years. It has gone from kind of boutique sectors, pharmaceuticals and maybe a little IT, to now when you pick up a smartphone, there's 3,000 patents in that device. We've seen the institutionalization of IPR, where you now have specialized courts in Germany and East Texas that just deal with these. We see whole firms that don't ever, non-practicing entities is what they're called. Some people call them trolls, that just collect patents to use to diffuse technology or to maybe get some money out of the process. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying this has changed the game. And if we talk about diffusion of technology, you have to bring this into the equation. And this leads me to my last point, which is what we call internally regulatory incumbency. So many of our regulations are influenced by large incumbents who can afford to come around the table. It's not the new startups. And these incumbents, whether they're the scientists themselves, have vested interests. I think scientists are no more enlightened than farmers when it comes to some of their self-interests. And so we have to begin to factor this into our policies and try to figure out how do we rise above this a little bit and think about the people who aren't at the table, but also the kind of the unborn firms that could benefit from a different set of regulations that currently aren't on the table. Let me end there, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's great. Are there a couple of questions? We don't often get the STI director defenceless in front of an audience. And we've got a few moments up our sleeve. Is there anything anyone would like to raise or comment on that he's said? Or are you all feeling commented out? It is the end of a forum. Kumi.
No, but I just wanted to elaborate on the point of IPRs. And it came up already, well, at least from what I noticed, came up twice in the course of this forum. What about not filing patents? What about, the model of Telsa and the like, where they don't try to protect their intellectual property? And then that came up, I think, in the plenary 3 on this. It was a question posed to our colleague from the Netherlands, Marjolein, who has this startup firm, and how she's having a difficult time. And that question was posed to her. Her answer was that she wants to keep it. So it's an open question. Do we have an OECD view on this, or we don't yet?
Okay, I thought you might want to collect them. That way I can avoid the hard ones. It's a time-honored practice here. First of all, the problem with the intellectual property rights, I think, and it's not a problem, don't get me wrong. I think they're important. The problem is they've just moved mainstream. They are as important to the economy now as trade policy or labor policy, or it's a framework condition in OECD speak. And when I start talking to ministers about this, they quickly devolve to patents, which makes sense, because it's a little bit more understandable. But the UK Intellectual Property Office has done some of the best work I've seen on this. And they actually tried to value in the UK the stock of different types of intellectual property. And bear in mind, it's not only patents, it's trademarks. Talk to L'Oreal, this is important. It is design rights. Talk to Apple, that's what makes that product. And it's, most importantly, copyright, which is a much different type of intellectual property. You can get up to 90 years protection on copyright. And there's no diffusion requirement. I mean, there's no filing requirement like with a patent saying this is what it is, this is how it works. And so it lacks some. And they found in the UK that intellectual property was 6 times more valuable to that economy wide than patents. Okay, and so I guess I'm just saying there's a need for us to begin to differentiate our policies and our view on this. Let me answer your question. I think there's a lot of companies like that now. I went to New Zealand not too many years ago in Weta Digital, which are the people that bring you the computers behind Avatar. They don't patent anything. They're moving way too fast. And matter of fact, they want their very sophisticated software to go out because they want to build a community of people that know how to use it because they want to then hire them. That's how quickly they were growing. But I think that's increasing the ethos in many. I read something last night, my last thing. The people who brought you LinkedIn, the people who have brought you Tesla, are just put the newspaper said close to $1 billion into open artificial intelligence research center with the idea of making this really open, but with the idea they're very worried, sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but that artificial intelligence could have a really negative social impact. And they want to make sure through this foundation that it stays on the positive side and we protect against the downside.
Andy, if I could just ask you a question. If you took the view that we've spent the last 250 years trying to mobilize vast amounts of material to create the civilization that we have, and we're now facing the fact that we can't go on doing that we're going to have to, and indeed the GDP grew up around very much a quantifiable and materially based economy, and if we're now going to have to basically sort of de-engineer the whole thing to dematerialize it, I mean, we're using knowledge to reduce the amount of stuff and the amount of movement and the amount of transportation and so on and so forth. So, I mean, does it really mean that, in fact, if we're thinking about a green economy, that the rents associated with intellectual property become really all important? I mean, you know, thinking back over the last century, if you could corner markets in materials, you could extract amazing rents, and we saw OPEC do it amongst others. But I mean, are we now saying that the rents are actually dematerialized rents, and that's really where public policy, even if it's thorny and the owners want to contest it, is this where we're really going to have to start to focus?
I love that question, and I'm going to answer two different ways. The one way which you didn't ask it, but there's a lot of news, and we have to talk to another colleague here, Ken Ash, but, you know, people are worried that world trade is going down, and they see this as a cyclical sign that is bad, that growth is slowing, that imports are lower, and this is a warning bell. And I look at it and say, are we sure it's cyclical? It may be secular. And I point to two trends, one that we just referred to, the kind of dematerialization, the digitization of many things, but also just demographics. I mean, as you move to an older age, you don't buy as many stuff, material things, and you're buying much more services. I mean, you got as many washing machines as you need by the time you hit 50 or so. So that's one answer. And the other is, I know you've been busy, Simon, but we put out a really important book in 2013 called Knowledge-Based Capital. And the reason that's important is it builds out of work coming out of the Federal Reserve Board in about 2009 that basically said, wait a minute, the way we learned capital in graduate school was it was machinery, equipment, and structures. And that's how the national accounts are set up. But slowly these national accounts had said, well, maybe we think R&D is capital because it lasts for more than 1 year, and maybe we think software it will last for more. And so they've begun to make these, capitalize them, but this work went even further. It said intellectual property should be in there, databases should be in there, and some economic competencies like brand and know-how, like complex systems integration that Airbus does, is really a capital investment that they have made that they reap over more than 1 year. And so and when you look at this and you run it through the total factor productivity models, you find that, in fact, this type of capital is far more productive than the traditional. So my answer to you is enthusiastic. Yes, this is where rents will be coming from. I think they increasingly are. And that's where the policies within intellectual property become that more important.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I think that's all very interesting. That's what a dull thing to say. But in fact, I think we're all I think we're all pondering just well, you talk about wetter, things moving faster than they can patent. I think that's the challenge for an organisation like this, that there are many things moving faster than we can actually tabulate them, develop indicators for them, define them. So that's pretty chastening. Well, look, we've now reached almost the end, but I'm very pleased to introduce to you our Deputy Secretary, one of our Deputy Secretaries, Mr. Tamaki. He's responsible for a clutch of bits of the OECD, but importantly, he is the Deputy Secretary who's responsible for green growth. And I just want you to know that I spend a life trying to bat away everything with green in front of it, because there are people who are here who haven't still yet quite worked out that if you say green, it doesn't mean it's necessarily the Environment Directorate. One of the things we did with green growth was to make it completely horizontal, and the reality is that there is actually very, very close cooperation with certainly the directorates I mentioned, and some more besides. And one of the reasons that we do cooperate is that we've actually erected a mechanism to get together 3 times a year to take stock and to develop our forward work programs in a collaborative way. And the person who convenes that is Mr. Tamaki. So please, it's your pleasant task to be the last speaker here today.
Thank you, Simon. Looking at from here, most of you are still fresh and green, but it was on a quite long day. We are approaching the last station of such a busy day. I believe you have met the key objective of this Green Growth Sustainable Development Forum, which is to identify first knowledge gap and help prioritize next step required to address these gaps. The intention of this event is to tackle horizontal and cross-cutting green growth issues, themes. Systems innovation is a perfect example that cuts so widely across nearly everything we do, and everything that is required in order to transition to a greener growth trajectory. But this broad efforts to mainstreaming green innovation at the OECD extends more widely. For example, this forum has heard about the application of drones in the agriculture sector to improve resource efficiency and environmental performance, and identified priorities for further work. I hope this will be picked up by relevant parts of the Agriculture Committee, Environmental EPOC, Environmental Policy Committee, and other places throughout the OECD. Also, your discussion today on the role of the new data sources in greening growth, it links nicely with the work of EPOC on the role of big data that has recently been discussed by the Working Party on Environmental Information. And I trust the research priorities identified today will feed into their work. Innovation in the effective use of satellite imaging and big data can also contribute to the SPINE project, as it stands for Spatial Planning Instruments and the Environment, and aims to assess the environmental and economic effectiveness of spatial and land use planning instruments. So this Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum took up issues that can be further addressed by many OECD committees. I trust the knowledge gaps and research priorities that were identified during this forum yesterday and today will be reflected in the OECD's committee's program of work and budget for 2017-2018 and beyond. Also, the OECD work on green innovation and more broadly green growth is being carried out in cooperation with our sister institutions, IEA, ITA, International Transportation Forum, and Nuclear Energy Agency. Also important for the OECD to keep up the good cooperation with other international players active in these fields, say World Bank, GGK, Green Growth Knowledge Platform, and GGGI, and I just mentioned but a few. Before getting too far into the future, I also want to take a brief moment to report back on last year's forum, 2014. 2014 forum was held on the theme of addressing the social implication of green growth, the labor market and distributional aspects of green growth policies. As a follow-up of 2014 forum, particularly to the green skills issue discussed at the forum, the OECD is co-hosting with the UN's Partnership for Action on Green Economy, PAGE, the first global forum on green economy learning to take place starting tomorrow until the end of this week. So for some of you, you have to work further. The OECD's lead program will contribute to this event, PAGE's event, drawing on our work on green skills, education and training, and to exchange views with over 100 practitioners from OECD as well as developing countries. Next year's OECD Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum, 2016, will focus on spatial planning, land use, and urban green growth, most likely in November 2016 here at the OECD headquarters in Paris. Yet another cross-cutting issue that is critical for green growth. So stay tuned for further information for the next year's forum, and please contact the OECD Secretariat staff here with your suggestions on how to shape next year's event. Returning to this year's forum and the subject of innovation, I hope this forum has generated momentum for further policy research on green innovation and to approach this from a broader and integrated systems perspective. Our contribution to realizing a greener future depends on it. Before concluding, I'd like to raise this report again. Yesterday, Secretary General Angel Gurria mentioned aligning policies for low carbon economy. I have two reasons to suggest you to read it. First, this report contains innovation, so you can review the discussion yesterday, and this has a chapter on urban mobility, sustainable land use chapter, so you can prepare the next year's forum. This report, the second reason to encourage you to read it, it covers something outside core environmental policies. It has a section on taxation. So you may imagine, oh, taxation, transition to low carbon economy, oh, carbon taxation. No. This discusses the energy taxation, particularly the difference between gasoline and diesel. So many countries charge lighter taxation on diesel than gasoline. Some countries encourage to use using the company car preferential tax treatment. Even local authorities, through property taxation, they may encourage single occupancy house than apartments. So to urge the city exploring further. So even the narrow-minded tax policymakers, once I was, they have to work for the transition to low carbon economies. So horizontality, we discussed the horizontality at the OECD, but horizontality also requires in your each chapter. So this is with these two reasons, I suggest to you this report to put beside the Christmas tree as a Christmas tree. Thank you. Thank you very much for your active participation. Thank you.
Well, it just remains for me to thank you for all coming and to thank Kumi and Ryan and their team for putting this together. These forums are once a year. We have a little bit of money, which the council votes for us to mount one of these each year on a different topic. It takes a year. You'd be surprised how hard it is to put together something cross-cutting like this, because when you start it seems so amorphous and so vague. And yet I have to say, when I saw the program and the speakers, I was really thrilled. I mean, and I listened to some very, very precise presentations. I should tell you, we didn't get everybody. I mean, and I don't think some of the business leaders out there actually realize what they miss. We put a lot of effort in trying to get somebody from Tesla here, not because it was a name you all knew and because it was sexy, but because we thought Tesla might be able to say something really, really interesting about a bundle of technologies which could go in a number of different ways. It was that sort of nascent potential. And we could just never tie them down. Now, you know, they're probably thinking, we're moving at 100 miles an hour, governments, who is this, who's the OECD? But I think they miss out sometimes. And we've tried others too. There are people in the renewable sector I've been trying to talk to, and they're very busy and they don't need governments. Until suddenly there's some systemic thing about infrastructure and they've washed up on the wrong side of it and it's too late. So we need to keep those lines of communication open. On the spatial land use one, we're really looking forward to that, because that's where, frankly, a lot of business gets done. And in some parts of the world, governments are becoming less functional and cities are having to become more functional because they're operating at a more human level. They're operating at the level at which constituencies can make sense of things, and so you can build better mandates for doing things anyhow. You don't need another speech. Look, thank you to those who've organised the event. There is an evaluation form. If you've sat on it, just get up and pull it from underneath. You should have all got one, correct? Please fill this out. You know, and you can say things like bored and they didn't get to the point or didn't answer the question. We don't mind how critical you are. We really need the feedback because we're trying to build fora which are useful to you and to us. Now, we're going to listen. We have listened very carefully. We've taken a lot of notes. Thank you to the 3 report back chairs today for the job that you did. We've got all of that on board, plus more. I suppose I should say, Andy, let's watch the 2017-2018 PWB. Yeah, you saw him? He nodded. Very good. Thank you.